Safe to Fly, en app for alle brukere av droner. Tjenesten alltid oppdatert og enkel å bruke slik at du finner all informasjon du trenger på ett sted. Fly sikkert. Alltid.
God morgen! Det blitt den 17. november, og i dag skal vi snakke om, ja, det helt riktig, DJI Mavic 3. And good morning, Ferdinand Wolf, Creative Director at DJI. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning as well. And as we say here in Germany, guten Morgen. So it sounds very similar to what you say in Norway.
More or less the same. You probably also then realized my introduction when I was saying this morning we're going to be talking about the DJI Mavic 3.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Good. Ferdinand, it's a pleasure having you here. I know that somebody has picked up your name on several of the DJI platforms. I mean, you've been in this game quite a while, and you also were pretty central when DJI launched their Mavic 3 just a few days ago. Tell us a little bit about your background and also your enthusiastic approach to working with cinematic drones.
Well, it's close to my 6th year now at DJI, and I'm already basically working with the company for 2 more years as a content partner. So I know the company since for over 8 years now. Before I joined DJI, I already have been like a professional drone pilot in the film industry. As I said, being a content partner for DJI, and then even after I joined DJI, I'm still working freelance as well. So I'm very close to the industry. I go to film sets every now and then. I talk to a lot of people. That helps me to keep I would say a objective, kind of unbiased view on things, which is very helpful, I feel. And then, of course, over the years with DJI, I learn a lot about product development, about the company itself, about the industry from the inside. So I guess I have both. I know both worlds, the consumer, or both, like all the 3 worlds: the consumer world, the professional user world, and the other side, basically the manufacturer world.
Sounds interesting, and I know that also looking back to the video when you launched the DJI Mavic 3 a few days ago, as I mentioned earlier, it was a spectacular location you chose, and I assume it wasn't green screen, that it was actually real stuff. Where did you go to shoot those footage?
So the outside was in Austria, Sölden. It's actually a James Bond location. It's called 007 Elements. So that's one of the actual filming locations of James Bond Spectre. And then the inside we had to shoot in Frankfurt because of logistics. So basically there's like a cut when I go inside that's done in Frankfurt. Actually, it's very close to our office where DJI Europe is based in Frankfurt. So it's just around the corner, which makes
sounds pretty good. So, I picked up earlier this week, I picked up the new one, and I must say my first impression, and just to reveal, I haven't opened it yet. This is just my first impression holding it, and it's always fascinating to see new feature, both how the body is protected, but I know you got a version as well which is easier to unpack and unwrap. Ferdinand, we need to look into actually the unit itself. What is it that you have released here? The Mavic 3, but what is the Mavic 3? Do it in short.
Well, I would say the Mavic 3 is like the next consequent step. And I would even say, well, probably the biggest evolution, or you could even say revolution in a lot of aspects, to the Mavic series. It's definitely the flagship model that packs so many brand new technologies inside a compact drone that still, like the original thought of the Mavic was always to have a drone that is foldable and that you can just throw in your backpack, basically just hold it in the palm of your hand, that you basically can take everywhere you go, no matter what you do. If it's skiing, going on top of it like a remote mountain. I mean, I've went pretty much everywhere. I went to over 70 countries with drones, and Sometimes I travel light as well. So basically that's the original thought of the Mavic, to be able to take your drone everywhere you go. And you know, in the first iterations of the Mavics, and there are a lot of Mavics, of course you had to make some compromises in terms of image quality, flight times, things like that, because of the small and folding form factor. But I would say, like in this latest iteration, you get the best out of both worlds again. You get like a foldable compact drone that delivers absolutely stunning, professional grade image quality that you really, and that's something I really mean, that you really can use in top-notch productions, because of I guess we will talk about this later, about the camera and the extra features the Cine version packs in, but also regarding flight time, regarding flight characteristics, and then obviously there's a lot of technology inside to make this drone smarter. You see a lot of additional sensors. It's not only this, I mean, it doesn't help if you just throw a lot of sensors on a drone. That doesn't make it safer. You have to, of course, have the software, you have the brains to process and you know, calculate, and then you work with all those sensors to make it safer. But yeah, there's so many new things inside this. So I'm very, very excited about it. I'm working with it or testing it for over a year now. And yeah, it's basically, personally to me, it's a dream to come true. I mean, it was a huge step from the original Mavic to go to the Mavic 2 Pro with a 1-inch sensor. That was already something where I'm like, okay, this is it. You know, this it doesn't get better than this. Finally, I have everything I wanted. You know, actually, I thought that when they put the 1-inch sensor on the Phantom 4 Pro, I was already like, wow, okay, that's it. That's amazing.
Because mentioning what you're saying there, I think that, you know, I've been working as a photographer for close to 30 years before my job here at the US Norway, and you know, one of the things that I've been missing is that the manual control on the drones has not been in the menu. So you won't be able then to set shutter speed and aperture and ISO as you would like to in many of the drones. So just going back, I just calculated that it's 1,183 days since the Mavic 2 Zoom was released. And at that time, that seems to be like the best in class. But still then going back to November 2016, the Inspire 2, which then seemed to be like the flagship. How have you been working from the Inspire 2 to the Mavic series, but then onwards to the Mavic 3, to get such a small compact drones with all this feature who gives the manual control for the photographer or cinematographer?
Well, there's, you know, we're always trying to push the limits and push the technology in all directions. I mean, as we just discussed, I think one of the most notable features, and I mean, that's what you see on my Mavic 3 hoodie as well, is obviously the Micro Four Thirds sensor, which is just insane if you think about it. Because I remember like talking to the developers 2 years ago on Christmas. It was exactly that time where we were debating which sensor to put on this. You know, whether it will be like a 1-inch sensor again with the optical zoom, and then they came up with the idea to put a 4/3 sensor on this, and I was like, this is impossible. I mean, how do you want to put a Micro Four Thirds or a 4/3 sensor on a drone that basically keeps the original form factor? And I did not believe that that's possible, but they said, well, it's doable. And that's, you know, that's one like huge push. As I said, I was already like, okay, that's it, when they put the 1-inch on the Phantom 4, and then I was like, oh, crazy, they even put a 1-inch on the Mavic. And now we look where we are now. Now we have like a 4/3 sensor, basically the same sensor size and very similar sensor quality to the original Inspire 2 X5S camera on a drone this size, which is just, yeah, mind-blowing if you think about it. And obviously that's one of the key areas where we constantly want to improve the image quality and giving giving the user, the photographer, the filmmaker, the most advanced filmmaking or photography tool, like the best camera you can have. And that's one of the things I mentioned in the launch video as well. You may consider this not only like as a drone with an excellent camera, it's more like an excellent camera that can fly and perfectly fly. So it's making the seamless switch between being, you know, a drone where you attach a camera like in the early days, or a drone that has an integrated camera, but it's like primarily it's a drone and you have to make some compromises on the camera. And now it's basically a camera that doesn't have many compromises, and it's also like a flying camera. And that's what people use it like. It's nothing like fancy anymore to have a drone or attach a drone to a camera to a drone. It's basically a standard now. And I think with this product, this is like the first product where it's absolutely natural. This is like a flying camera. It's just like a camera that flies, a flying camera, whatever you want it. But coming back to your original question, it's not only pushing in the camera section, it's pushing in flight time, safety, usability. So there's so many areas where this makes huge steps forward. It's crazy.
So where would you say then, before we start going into the details, but with what you see now, where would you say that DJI is placing yourself in competition? I mean, there are other players out there. Skydio has been mentioned as one of them, where the autonomy principle has been not having too much of a competition, maybe until now. So where would you say that DJI is placing yourself in that scale? Because you're putting more and more autonomy, going from automatic features to autonomous features. Where would you place yourself in the competition now?
I don't think there's any drone that really comes close to the Mavic 2 Pro. And now basically we have this, which is basically outperforming the Mavic 2 Pro in every direction, in every aspect. So I think it's a big push in all directions for different use cases as well. Obviously for the photographer, for the filmmakers, that's easy to see. But as you said, because of the 360 sensors and the internal processing power, and of course the software and firmware, because that's where the magic finally happens. As I said, it doesn't help if you have the greatest hardware. You need to have the software, the firmware running and then calculating and doing all the magic basically happening. So and also with the available 4G dongle, I think this, and of course with the integrated tele camera, which is, I don't know if you already tried it, it's insane. It's like 162 millimeter lens at 28 times zoom. So this is definitely something that a lot of search and rescue people will use, police, firefighters. It's extremely good for inspection. So basically it's pushing in all different areas, and it's pushing in all different use cases as well, not only for filmmakers and photographers, but so I would say it's competing with a lot of different products at the same time. And
let's unfold it together so we can see. So I got the regular version, but you got the other one, which is the sine version. So while we do this unfolding together here, Ferdinand, tell me a little bit about who is this one for?
Basically, for most people, and it already has like all the great features we're talking about in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And the only two things the Mavic 3 Cine puts on top, yeah, well, it's a huge battery. If you,
oh yeah, it's heavy.
Yeah, if you compare that to a, I don't have a Mavic 2 battery here now, but I can compare it with, like, let's put this is like a Mavic Air 2 battery in comparison. So you see,
yeah.
It
explains also why then we see the up to 45 or 46 minutes of
it's a huge battery. So basically, if you look at the drone and then all the battery next to it,
yeah,
it's mostly battery, but it's very similar to like phones and tablets. If you remove the battery, there's not much space anymore. The battery is what consumes most of the space. But coming back to your question, so the big difference between the normal Mavic 3 and the Mavic 3 Cine basically is that the Cine version is focused at pro filmmakers that want to get the most out of their footage by using a more advanced codec. And that codec is Apple ProRes 422 HQ. So people that are in the filmmaking world or are familiar with cameras, with pro-grade cameras, will know that ProRes 422 is a very, very good codec for videos. And it's basically the standard in professional filmmaking, as it's very lossless. It's not a lossless codec, but it doesn't compress or lose that much information as H.265 or H.264, and it's not that highly compressed. So the big advantages you get in the post-production is that it's very easy to work with. So you don't have to transcode it in post-production or have to render proxies to smoothly work with it. So you basically can throw it in your favorite editing program, be it Premiere, Resolve, Final Cut, whatever, and just work with it straight away, even on lower end computers and laptops. Yeah, that's a funny design, I know.
No,
So,
it's funny. I just actually was saying to myself that what a great way of actually protecting it. For the
yes.
first using it, I find it quite easier to attach instead of the plastic hood for the other Mavic series.
Yeah, and it doesn't only cover the main camera and hold the main camera. One of the big advantages of this thing is that it also covers the obstacle sensing cameras, which are very fish-eyed, and you should of course not scratch them, because then the obviously it will degrade. So that's the reason why this thing also covers the sensors on top, which is quite smart. Coming back to the Cine version, so it adds ProRes 422 HQ, and because ProRes 422 HQ, as I said, is not that highly compressed as H.264 or H.265, it has very high bit rates, and because of that, it creates large files, and it needs a proper media to write on. So that's the reason why we integrated the 1 terabyte SSD into the drone, because a micro SD card would not be fast enough to cope with the codec. So basically, that's the upgrade you can get from the Cine version. The internal SSD, and the internal SSD also opens up using ProRes 422 HQ. So if you want to get the maximum out of your footage, you get the Cine version to have the ProRes.
But you also get the smart controller if you choose the
right. And if you get the combo, you also get the smart remote controller, which is fantastic. I already like the old, well, it's not old, but the previous smart controller, but this is even better. For me, like, one of the biggest advantages on this is that you finally have gimbals, like RC style gimbals. So they are like for somebody that flies basically every day and needs to get like the most smooth shots. Yeah. So in comparison,
so is this Occlusant 2.0 or 3.0 with the one coming in my version?
It's 3+. Well, the OcuSync is more on the video side, so it's not really related to the remote controller. Yeah, it is really, because it's built in. But this is O3+. So the technology that's inside the drone, that's where the magic happens, is O3+. And your remote controller basically is able to receive that as well. And
Ferdinand is the dual camera on it. You need to show us a little bit, because I was just looking closer into the different cameras. So for the main one, well, going back to what happened when Hasselblad was partly acquired by DJI in 2017, we all expected some major changes to come on the optics. Is this one of the best results so far from the collaboration with Hasselblad and DJI?
Well, I just removed the ND filter because I had an ND filter on. So that's basically something, ND filters, I think most people, it's easy to, I need to hold it higher. So I removed that so you can better see the two cameras. Well, the main camera is done with in cooperation with Hasselblad. So the color signs and everything behind it, there's a lot of Hasselblad pedigree in it. And then the second tele camera up there, that has nothing to do with Hasselblad. So I wouldn't say that the two camera system is something that Hasselblad came up with or we benefited, but the main camera is definitely something where Hasselblad genes are inside. And the tele camera here on top, it's basically the same sensor as the Mavic Air 2 or the Air 2, but with a totally different and new lens to give that tele feature.
Yeah, is that an optical zoom or is it digital?
It's both. So it is a 7 times. Well, it's not zoom. It's like just a lens. It's a tele lens. It's 100 compared to full frame. It's 162 millimeters. So it's just a tele lens. There is no optical zoom. I think there's a lot of misconception. A lot of people say like it's zoom. It's actually, there's no zoom. There's no optical zoom on this.
Oh, so no elements moving inside.
No. The only elements that are moving are to focus the lenses, but those are two prime fixed lenses.
Yeah.
So this is a 24 millimeter, and this is 162 millimeter. And the zoom you can get is basically digital zoom. So you can zoom digitally from the 24 millimeters main camera. You can basically zoom digitally in to the point where you switch over to the tele camera, and then from the tele camera you can again digitally zoom in. So there's a lot of misconception about this.
So that means that you're just basically using the same frame, you're just cropping it, going closer and closer. You don't get the same.
Correct.
So does
and
that?
And you will see it also if you go to, let's say, like 6 times zoom of the main camera, and then to 7 times zoom, you will see a small switch over, because the cameras are a bit like the orientation is not totally in line. So you will see like it's not a totally seamless thing. You just like see it, but it's, as I said, there's no zoom lens on this.
Exactly.
So it's different than the Mavic 2 zoom. And that's maybe something I see a lot of people being confused by this. The zoom you have, but this is like a general thing. A lot of people think that a tele lens is a zoom. It's not. A zoom is something where you can actually change the focal length. A tele camera is a long length, you know, and then you have wide angle lens and you have long lenses. That's a tele camera. This basically has a wide angle lens and a tele camera. It does not have a zoom. It does not have a zoom lens. It has two different lenses, a wide angle and a tele, and then you have digital zoom. That's maybe something which is interesting for people that watch it.
But that's really important to clarify, because that means that going to an ordinary photographer, it means like you're having two fixed lenses. One is then a wide angle and one is a tele lens. You don't have anything in between necessarily. So thank you for clarifying that. I think that was relevant, because looking at the specs, just saying that camera 2 has an aperture of 4.4 and 162 millimeters, that explains why there is nothing from whatever it starts to then it is 162.
Exactly, it's two prime lenses.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I saw that the difference was that the camera 1 has then, of course, the advantage of the raw footage if you need to, but the other one has the JPEG. Is there any reason for that? Is it a matter of technology, available processor capacity, or what's the reason why you can't get raw on both of them?
Well, the main reason is that the main goal of the second camera is not necessarily photography, filmmaking, or using it as a main camera for capturing images. It's more like for search and rescue, for, like, we call it explore mode, to use it as like a binocular, whatever you want to call it. It's more like a tool than an imaging device, I would say. So that's why it is kind of limited in the way you can set it in video mode. It's only 4K 30. You cannot change the frame rates. You cannot change D-lock. You cannot, manual expose. You have exposure compensation though, and the same in the stills department. You cannot shoot raw, but that's basically it's not a hardware limitation. it's more like something, it's not intended to do it, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's
But
the reason.
looking at what you're explaining about the possible users, you're also mentioning that the professional user is also beyond the regular cine photographer, etc. Also looking at the price point, but also how the lens has a dual function. It reminds me of the dual enterprise. When can we expect an enterprise version of the Mavic 3 then?
It's a good question. I cannot comment on that. Honestly, I don't know. I'm not that. I'm not into the enterprise division of DJI, so I don't know.
Because it looks like with the capacity it has, but also the advantage of the dual sensor, there are definitely similarities of switching between two of them, I would say, and also when we see of the price point, which is also a market where the enterprise is willing to both invest in it because it has a more advanced feature. In my opinion, it will be looking at a possible roadmap ahead of you, but I'm going to leave it there. So I know that some of the ones who are looking at the webinar of for us today, they're looking at the specs. But just for those of you who are watching us, I encourage you to look into DJI's website and also look into the closer specification, because this is a general talk about the advantage of the Mavic 3, and we'll get closer into a review when we have been testing it in real life application. But today we've been able to talk with you, Ferdinand, about the adventure that you also been a part of, actually developing this drone. So going back 2 years in December 19, when you met your technicians, what has been in a way your pet project on the Mavic 3, and what are you most happy about seeing actually on the actual drone being launched now?
Well, as I already mentioned, I think getting the 4/3 sensor on the Mavic series, I think that's for me personally, because I'm all about filmmaking and cameras. I used to be a professional photographer for 10 years as well. So I geek out about cameras. So seeing a 4/3 sensor with a decent quality lens, like a really good lens actually, on a drone of this size, that's, to me, it's the biggest step, and where I'm like just totally fascinated that the developers of DJI were able to pull that off. And let's not forget, it's not only about the sensor size. I mean, everything that goes to the sensor first has to go through the lens. So the lens design is crucial, and you can easily throw a 4/3 sensor on a drone, but you have to basically well, it's not easy to do that in the first place, to put a 4/3 sensor on a drone of this size. But the other challenging thing is to get a lens design that is compact enough and lightweight enough, but also has good quality to accompany the sensor. And to me, one of the most important things when filming is you most of the time you want to film like in sunset, sunrise, or golden hour, so you have a lot of dynamic and high contrast, and you also get like a direct sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things you always will see with smaller sensors and smaller lenses, especially lenses that don't have an aperture that you can close down, you won't have nice flares, right? And that's what people just want. They want nice flaring. You want like a nice characteristics of the light coming into the lens. And with this lens, it's the first time, and I was shooting with and together with another cinematographer, we were flying both the Mavic 3 in sunset, and he was like, wow, this is the first time I see a really, really nice lens flare from like a compact drone.
Yeah.
So because you can stop down the aperture to like a whatever f10, and then you get really nice flares, and
filter as well.
Yeah. And then you have high dynamic range, you retain all the details because of the great codec. So this is the first time basically with a drone like that where you don't have to be afraid to film in directly into the light, into a sunset or sunrise, because actually it can cope with it. The codec doesn't break, you get the nice flaring, you don't get any weird artifacts. There were times, and there was also products with Micro Four Thirds where you got weird pinkish artifacts and flares and reflections, all that kind of stuff. So I haven't seen that at all on this camera, which is, to me personally, because I care about camera quality most.
Yeah, I compared a little bit on the specification on the Inspire 2 and also the Air 2S, and it was quite interesting going on the Mavic 3, looking at the weather resistance or the ascend and descend was ascend about 8 meters per second, descend 6 meters per second, and then going back to the Inspire 2. So it beats the Inspire 2 on both ascending and descending. But it also, if you're looking at the weather resistance, it says on the specification for the Inspire 2, it's like -4. But then you have the Mavic 3 going down to -10. And the maximum wind tolerance is 12 meters per second, which is then far beyond the other Mavic series. But one thing that I haven't found, Ferdinand, that might you be able to answer is, what about the weather resistancy in terms of rain, etc.? You know, Norway is windy, but it's also partly rainy.
Well, it's not waterproof. Like the Inspire 2, this is not built for flying in rain. Most of the time you don't want to fly in rain because you will instantly get driplets on the lens. So you should not fly it in rain. If there's some drizzle or whatever, like it's called drizzle or dizzle, I always mix it up. Don't know. Yeah. I think that's fine to a certain time, but it should not get soaking wet. I mean, I flew it through a waterfall and stuff like that, but it's certainly not recommended. So there's no guarantee. It's not officially waterproof or anything like that. I think that's something you have to go to the industrial or like the industry products from DJI. If you really want to fly in heavy rain, then you go to the, M series, like the M300s and things like that that have more waterproofness. So this does not have any sealing or stuff like that. So you might get away flying in light rain, and most probably will, but no guarantee. And from a safety aspect, you shouldn't.
Any ways of getting rid of the driplets on the lens? That's a global problem for everybody.
Yeah, I actually discussed this with our leader at DJI already. We were discussing if you could build in like a rotating disc mechanism, like helicopters have, or the Russian the cars that film car commercials, like they have a rotating spinning disc.
Definitely, yeah.
But that's obviously for a drone of this size, it's very difficult to implement. Then you have side effects like if you have a spinning disc on a gimbal, you also generate gyro effects. So there's a lot of things. But as you can see, we're always pushing and we're always discussing new things. And I already talked about this and discussed that with the engineers, if that's possible to do that.
Everybody wants more than you already have now. So let's hope that we don't need to wait 3 more years for the Mavic 4 series. Last question for you, Ferdinand, before we're ending this conversation about the Mavic 3, to give us a little bit of the highlight, but also the inside of the creation of the Mavic 3. What about the brain processor capacity, which is inside? Is that a new processor that you're using, or is this something which is taken from another part of your family?
We're using a lot of DJI silicon nowadays in our products, which is like, there you see like companies, well, obviously, I guess watch the latest keynote from Apple, where they enhance their own silicon, the M1 chips. Now they have like the M1 Pros and Max, and I think that was one of the biggest steps for Apple. And same goes for DJI. So inside this, the video downlink system is DJI silicon. The image processing, that's DJI silicon. So there's a lot of our own silicon now inside the drones, which gives us full power over what we, how we design our products. And I opened this up already. I can tell you this is like as highly integrated as it can get. It's basically, it's just there's no useless space inside that. So having our own silicon, like Apple, helps us a lot designing the hardware and the software exactly to fit our needs. And I think that's a huge step. And it also makes us a bit more independent from things like the chip crisis. So as you as you obviously noticed, you have your product in your hand and you're not waiting for it like 9 months. Where you, if you order a car now, you have to wait for 9 months, right? I wanted to buy a car. I wanted to lease a new car. I have to wait for 9 months. So
I would recommend, instead of buying a new car, I would say buy a new drone instead. I think that's
so yeah, I mean that's what helps us a lot. So to answer your question, yes, there's a lot of DJI technology, not only software but also the hardware. And if you open this up, you will see it's insane, the amount of integration, like how all the chips like are arranged, and that we basically use a lot of our own DJI designed chips. That is something which makes something like that possible. It's not only size and capabilities, but it's also energy consumption. That's something you will always hear in the Apple presentations as well. Because if you create your own silicon and you write your own software, basically you have both components in your hand. And you know, I studied IT, I did programming, all that stuff. You basically have the full power. You don't rely on, if you buy silicon, and with silicon I mean the chips, you know, the hardware from third-party manufacturers, you always depend on how much access they give you to their hardware, about the, you know, the development kits and all that stuff, the SDKs, the APIs, and all that kind of stuff. So if you design your own hardware, you're in full control, you're in full power. So
that's an interesting point you mentioned, because I remember when we had some of the enterprise lenses or cameras that came out, they used the zoom or the Sony camera, which was inside. But then they had limitation of what they can do with the optics. So it meant that when they wanted to change, for instance, the aperture or shutter speed setting, it was a prefixed one. So, for instance, in the beginning, 2-3 years ago, a lot of them came back with a crystal clear image on the screen, but the actual footage was blurred because the shutter speed was like down to a 30th of a second, and there was no manual control of that. And that was due to limitation from Sony, that they just said you might use the unit yourselves, but we won't let you change and alter the setting according to your needs. So that's an interesting reflection, and see also then how DJI is then taking control over more of the whole system.
Yeah, that's ultimately the goal, but it's extremely costly to develop your own silicon. It takes a lot of time. So only like big companies like DJI or Apple or whatever, Sony, are able to do that, you know. But there's it's parallel to nothing if it's unparalleled. If you have the chance to do that, you open up like so many possibilities. And it's very hard to compete with that. And going back to the Apple example, I'm really curious to see how the PC world now tries to catch up with Apple in that regards, because as a laptop manufacturer, you have to basically like purchase and build together your laptop with different components from different manufacturers, and you will never have the full control. You will never have the full control of the software, because you basically run a Windows, which is another third-party software. So basically the same goes for the drones now, right? So we have the full power of all the components we have inside, and this gives us like a huge step, a huge boost, to do things like we did with the Mavic 3. I mean, this would not be possible if we hadn't have that, our own silicon and those things.
Great. Ferdinand, this is not a trial, but anyway, I'll ask you the question. Any last words?
Well, I know. I encourage everybody to like get hands on the Mavic 3 and get out and try it out for himself or herself. Let's be gender neutral. A lot of great female pilots out there as well. So because it's, you know, it's always the same. If DJI releases a new product, a lot of people are like, wow, this is the biggest things since sliced bread, and there will be also people like, oh, it's way too expensive, or it's not that great. But yeah, you really have to go out and use it by yourself to really see what it does. And I can assure you, all the people that have used it so far, that I went out with were totally fascinated, impressed by it. Just flying it, it just flies different than a Mavic 2 or all the other Mavics out there, because there's so much new technology. It's the latest flight controller. It's the latest algorithms running on it. It's just, yeah, it's just a different beast. And it's super silent, super powerful. As you already mentioned, it basically tops the Inspire on pretty much every aspect. So yeah, I would encourage people to give it a try and yeah, get your own impression of it. And be creative. And this is like a paintbrush, you know, the world is your canvas. So go out and create.
Sounds good. I will switch to Norwegian for my last final remarks for the audience back to home there. Så dette var egentlig en kort oppsummering av noen av de viktigste historiene bak dette. For de som har sittet I dag og ventet på alle spekkene om innsida og utsida av dette, ta en sjekk på nettsida til det og de. Og husk, dette kan være et godt alternativ for mange av dere som ønsker å oppgradere det fotografiske uttrykket deres. Ingen tvil om at den solid bygd. Om dette den riktige modellen for deg, ja, sjekk ut og se. Kanskje det på tide med en liten oppgradering av en mindre drone som kan gjøre veldig, veldig mye. Det var alt vi hadde for denne ukas sending. Neste uke det UNC 2021. Da vi på Sola Kulturhus, og vi lover deg smakebiter direkte I webinaret vårt.